You can get a lot of fun with Marcin.
Okay.
You go on.
Is this thing on? All right. Hi, everybody. Tim would kill me if I told you how I made those fonts move around, because it's not semantic at all. But so I'm Marcin. Mark essentially spoiled my whole talk, but I think that's okay. I'm at Google. I'm a web designer / developer, and as often these days, it's all in the slash, I suppose. My real job is on the Chrome team, and I work, on making our UI of our browser better. But I kind of 20%. We have this idea of a 20% with the doodle team. People, the illustrators who work on all these funny doodles on our homepage. And this is the team, or part of the team. You will notice, though, that I'm not there, because I can draw to save my life, right? So this is an illustration one of the illustrators did of a cat. This is the best cat I can draw. And this is literally like the top effort from me, right? Kind of a little bit Family Guy looking. But anyway, so how can I help, on the doodle team if I can't really draw? I want to rewind, though, for a second. I don't know how many of you remember this thing. This is 1977, and it's called either Atari 2600 or Atari VCS. It's a little bit older than I am, actually. But this is the thing, for the first time, you can plug into your TV and play, right, and interact with whatever's on your TV. But it's an incredibly simple piece of hardware, right? It's state of the art for 1977 for consumers, but it's incredibly simple. It doesn't even have video memory. You literally have to construct a pixel at the very moment the electron gun is supposed to shoot it in your screen. If you miss it, there's no pixel, which is kind of funny. So the games, all the games in 1977 looked exactly like this, right? It's a box and another box and a box in the middle. This whole machine was meant to do just that, right? By 1982, though, companies like Activision started building games like Pitfall, which, from today's standpoint, doesn't really look any better, maybe. But look at this crazy thing, right? It's trees, and this guy is jumping, and there's all sorts of different colors, and the guy kind of looks like a guy. All sorts of things are happening. There's a logo. It's actually animated sometimes. All of this. It's crazy, right? If you were in 1982 to get those things and go back in time to 1977 and show this to the people who created Atari 2600, they would say that's not possible, right? We can't do that. Like, this machine was never meant to do that. But they hacked it, and they looked into it, and they knew every little detail of it to make it do all sorts of things like that. And now, what does that remind you of? All of the things we do today. And I have a couple of examples from my kind of playfield. This is literally, you can see on the left that some of the programmers said, OK, we're going to lose 2 pixels on the left. We're going to gain 2 CPU cycles instead, which is amazing, right? Like, the level of detail you have to think through, to get the game you want, in which case this is Star Wars Empire Strikes Back or something like this. It's an amazing book. I highly recommend to anybody who's interested a little bit in technology history. It's called Racing the Beam, and this describes all sorts of things that I had to do. And I find inspiration in that. So what do I do? Well, we have those doodles, right? This is a Google logo circa 1999, and the first doodle, actually, we have this tradition in Bay Area in California called the Burning Man, which is this gathering of people once a year in the desert. And the first doodle was essentially an out-of-office message from Larry and Sergey saying, we're going to be at the Burning Man. Google is on its own for 3 days. If something goes wrong, well, we're going to be back in 3 days. We're going to fix it, right? So, well, needless to say, we don't do that anymore. But the tradition kind of started there. And, we started doing all sorts of interesting doodles, well, hopefully interesting, celebrating people, celebrating events, things that we care about, as a company. And we hope that people who use Google care as well, right? So we had all of these doodles, and there's many, many more over the years. Some of them are global, some of them are local. And about 2 years ago, I helped, the lead designer on the team, or the lead illustrator on the team knew me personally, and he knew I'm kind of a nerd. So they're like, hey, do you want to do, we're going to have either Super Mario or Pac-Man. Do you want to do either of those things? And I'm thinking, cool, yeah, I like video games, whatever. I'm gonna try to do that. And Pac-Man was born. Pac-Man was actually essentially the first in the line, right? So Super Mario might I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but we lost Super Mario to Pac-Man, essentially. And it was a watershed moment, right? People love this thing, and it surprised me, surprised all of us, how much people love Pac-Man, which, wasn't really that cutting-edge technology at all. It was all diffs and HTML4 and what have you, but people loved it, right? And we started thinking about all sorts of interactive doodles that we could do, and I'm a UX lead, or user experience lead on the doodle team, so I look at the UI of all the doodles, and I help with coding, or I code some of them, like Pac-Man and Jules Verne. I know how many of you saw Stanisław Lem doodle, the black and white with robots. I will talk about it in a second. And we have Les Paul as well, which was immensely popular because it was the first one where people could actually be creative and share things with other people. And it's kind of an interesting thing because this is kind of valuable to us, right? This homepage. Like, a lot of people still go to the homepage to search. A lot of people actually on Chrome, we see it all the time, go to google.com to search instead of searching in the Omnibox, but it's a whole different story, right? We can't let it break, right? We can't let it just be any slower than it has to, and it needs to be really, really fast, right? So there's this tension between, there's a lot of rules governing, what can go or cannot go on a homepage, but you also get an incredible amount of freedom, right? So you can do things like that, which is kind of crazy if you ask any marketing or PR person, what would that do to any brand, right? If you do a zipper on a homepage, right? And sort of, I don't know how many of you saw this. It was yesterday's doodle, literally. So we got a lot of freedom, too, to do interesting things and to experiment with new web technologies, which I'm, incredibly grateful for, right? So these are some of the things that we care about when we actually put. Oh my God, what happened there? We put things on the homepage, right? There's some technical considerations. Obviously, we want the homepage to be as fast as possible, even with a doodle on, even with an interactive doodle on. There are very specific requirements on the size and latency, stuff like that. We want it to work in as many browsers as humanly possible. We want it to be reliable. We don't want it to break the homepage. There's many, many variants of the homepage, as you can imagine, for different locales, different technologies, and stuff like that. But it's also, this is not a place where people go to play games or interact with things. This is a place where people go to search, right? So we need to respect that too. And we also need to respect the fact that all sorts of people come to search, from technology enthusiasts like all of you guys, or me included, hopefully, to somebody's grandma who might have never played a video game in her life, right? And you have a Pac-Man that starts making sounds and looks like God knows what. That might be a little bit scary, right? So there's all sorts of things we have to think about. Let me actually illustrate it in a case of one doodle that I did, well, not on the illustrative side, as you might imagine, but I wrote JavaScript for it for Jules Verne, which was, I think, about 1.5 years ago. So this was the original sketch from the illustrator saying, we have Jules Verne, maybe we can do something like his ship, and, there's going to be something outside or whatever. And once in a while, we'll brainstorm and think, what could this use actually more technology? And we're thinking, this is, Jules Verne, exploration. It would be amazing to allow people to explore, right? So we're thinking, OK, we're going to do something like this, right? This is one of the first prototypes that I built. This is we can go down and up, and you can explore sorts of interesting things. There's this nice parallax effects that we kind of liked. That's kind of cool, right? Nobody will ever understood that this is interactive, right? The arrow keys, which I just used to interact with it, might have worked for Pac-Man because it's a video game, right? It's a very classic video game. This one, nobody will ever think to do anything here, right? So we need something better. Here's one idea that we had to actually build a UI that's a little bit period-specific, right? It does this cool thing, but it's really not a very good UI. It just doesn't map, right? The arrow keys work kind of nice, but this thing does this rotation thing. It doesn't really have a steady state, right? You can't really stop your ship from doing anything. It's kind of weird, right? So back to the drawing board. Eventually, we started thinking, OK, we'll have something that looks like a joystick. People understand joysticks, right? And you can drag it, and it does the thing. This one's a little bit faster, actually. It's pretty cool. We did actually a user test, right? One of the first things that we did, we user tested this doodle, and it was very, very rudimentary form of user testing. Go on a corridor, grab somebody. Hey, what do we do here? And we're discovering two things, and this is really, really interesting. First of all, this is still not nearly prominent enough for people to understand something happens here, right? And the other thing, inexplicably, people start clicking on the dials, which we just added for decoration, right? And that's the problem with user testing. It won't really tell you what's wrong. I mean, it will tell you what's wrong, but it won't tell you why, ever. So you're like, OK. And this is the final UI that we had, right? One thing that we added here, you will notice that this dial is much bigger, much more prominent, emphasizes top and bottom. It actually, the whole thing auto-dives for a second if you don't really do anything with it after a while. You can drag it. You can actually just click on it. We added arrows. So if you're not familiar with dragging, which many people might not be, right? You can just click on it and it works. We also added this one cute thing for, people who might be kind of interested in new technology and happen to have a modern browser and modern computer, which, they can use the notebook to move around, right? Go up and down, like you would imagine Jules Verne, I guess. I don't know. And the thing is that, what happens when they click on the dial? Well, we blink this whole thing, which is like the cheapest UI trick you can ever imagine. It's like, you should actually be doing something here. But hey, it works, right? It actually works. So speaking about cheap tricks, we actually go even further sometimes. We can get away with things sometimes. You'll be like, hey, you kind of want to click on this thing, right? It would be nice if you could do it in all the applications, like have like an anthropomorphic creature or whatever, saying like, hey, this is the thing you want to press next. So that's kind of an interesting tension there, again, between, we want to use UIs that work for everybody, right? But we also want something that doesn't really feel like a computer UI, that doesn't feel like, like your word processor or whatever. That's something delightful and interesting and new, right? So this is the Stanisław Lem doodle. Stanisław Lem was a science fiction writer, Polish as I was, so my favorite writer, and we wanted to celebrate it in a very, very kind of interesting way. So I don't know how many of you saw this doodle when it ran in November. It's still archived somewhere. All of these things are. So if you wanna, you can go to google.com/doodles and replay all of these things, including Pac-Man, which is still incredibly popular, funnily enough, but with all of these other games lying around. But we had this, this was a game with puzzles, and it took you like 5 minutes to complete. It was pretty epic, for the space we're allowed to occupy. And it had all sorts of things, crazy things, including shooting baby robots from a cannon, based on one of the stories. But the UI we built was incredibly simple, right? It's 2 arrows and a fire button, right? It's like going back to almost Super Nintendo, right? Drawing inspiration, like the simplest controls you can use. And the first task is answer the question 2 + 2 = 4. Like if somebody doesn't get this UI, well, we can't really do anything easier, probably, that's really not boring, right? So we're trying to do all sorts of things. Those UI look probably not unlike anything else, but they're very simple UIs nonetheless. Right? Now, technologically, all of this UI stuff is interesting. Technologically, how did we get there, right? So this is the first interactive doodle we actually had. And this is 2009. It's hard to believe it's just 2009, right? This was a Newton doodle. You can just get the apple to fall down. This is the code for the doodle. It's literally 1 line. It's all done by hand, including optimization, to make sure it's as compact as we can, because again, this is the homepage, right? So I actually made a poster for the engineer Chris who did that, just kind of make fun of him, and which maybe not him. I mean, 20 years from now, we will look at whatever we're doing today the same way I'm looking at Atari 2600 and kind of wistfully, but it's kind of funny thing, right? But this is the thing, right? Pac-Man was about 5,000 lines of code. Stanisław Lem was 17,000. It's actually open source. You can look at it if you're interested. It's somewhere on google.code, or go to my website. There's a link to it. Kind of a lot of lines for something that goes live for 24 hours, but we do what we do. And the thing with all of this code is that you simultaneously have to look forward and look back, right? Try to see, are there any interesting, HTML5, CSS3, whatever we call it today, technologies that would help us. But also, we want to make sure that all of the people who come to google.com with all their browsers are also, having fun or discover something new, right? So here's again the Jules Verne in 3 different variants. Right? One at the top is the best experience you can get on Chrome, Safari, Firefox, in modern IE with transitions and accelerometer and whatnot. The middle one is IE6, right? And it's a little bit more shoddy. It doesn't have the full alpha transparency. It's a little bit funny. It's a little bit more choppy. The dials are not rotating because that requires CSS3, but it still works, right? And the funny thing for us, it always bothers us if people use all sorts of other browsers. most people typically are not bothered because that's the only browser they have, right? They don't consciously go and open it in Opera and Safari and some older version of something and like, oh my God, this is the worst code ever, right? They just have their browser. And hopefully, even with this simple version, they're still happy because it's still better than the static image, right? So we spend a lot of time doing those kind of things to make sure, everyone's supported or everyone's browser is supported. And I sometimes think this is a snippet of code from one of the doodles. Like, it might be kind of funny to be like a digital archaeologist, many years from now to look at this, and this is like, the bottom part is like i6, the worst hack ever, to have opacity. But the top thing is still like the worst hack ever, except it's a modern hack, right? So it's all of these hacks coexisting from, back from 1998, 1999, up until like 10 minutes ago, right? We almost kind of want to play bingo, where we say, how many things here do you personally know, right? Like there's a lot of this kind of things that you just have to know, and they don't really make any sense. They're completely arbitrary, but they're required to do. I think every time I lie, it goes off. I don't know what's going on there. So like the magical zoom number one, like the answer to all your problems with layout, right, or whatever. But it's also the other flip side of the bingo with all sorts of modern technologies that, again, you have to do the same thing, except the hacks. Nobody knows the hacks. They haven't been invented yet. All of these problems are not documented. All of these things only happen, in Canary and beta or dev versions of whatever browser you're using. And they're kind of, maybe if you know somebody on the browser team, you can ask them. Helps for me with Chrome, but not very many people have that opportunity. So it's kind of fun. You have to balance all of these things, and it's weird, but that's necessary for us. Let me give you an example from the modern times. Again, the Jules Verne doodle. To support the accelerometer, we actually had to have 3 different code paths for Firefox, for Chrome, and for iOS devices, right? With all sorts of numbers, multipliers to make it feel right that we just had to come up with ourselves, right? They weren't documented anywhere, and we just had to kind of trial and test it on a Saturday afternoon at work, true story. But here's the thing, though. So again, Chris and I are sitting next to each other. Imagine my computer is at the top, Chris's computer is at the bottom, right? Identical looking MacBooks Pro, identical version of Chrome. We both take our computers, pick them up, and turn left. And mine goes left, and his goes right. Nobody has any idea why. It turns out that some of those MacBooks had a different chip, and it reported reverse numbers. And since Chrome reverse engineered Apple, to support it, they just didn't know. And we actually filed a hardware bug for Chrome to make sure we do it, which is kind of a funny thing, thinking about like this, weird doodle that nobody should care about. But we discovered this bug, which was really, really funny, right? So some of the things are just around the corner. And now, somebody else at Google did it, but I thought it was too hilarious to not take partial credit for. This is yours revenge for, again, Atari 2600, right? Well, the games were kind of simple back then, but there's this funny explosion thing going on in the middle, right? The thing is, this console, it's extremely resource constrained, right? There's like no way to put any explosion in the code because it just takes too much code, right? What is this? This is actually the source code of the page just dumped in a video memory, right? Because there's like no room to keep anything else, so it just dumps itself. I think it's gorgeous, right? It's pretty amazing and very incredibly creative. And nobody will ever know unless you're like fluent at like 6502 assembly reading in this form. I don't know. But it's pretty cool, right? And it sort of stuff inspires me. Let me show you like some of the things that we have to do that feel exactly the same way. Kind of goofy, but we're kind of proud of them, right? So this is the tandem doodle, as we call it, when we have 2 things to celebrate. 4th of July and Rube Goldberg, right? So we have this very overly patriotic Rube Goldberg contraption. This was about, I think, after Pac-Man, so about 2 years ago, right? Let me just show it again. It's, kind of cute, whatever. It's nice, right? We're like, it looks pretty great. But how do we actually do this? Animated GIF is going to feel pretty terrible, right? Like, it's going to look terrible. We won't really know whether it's loaded. If it doesn't load, it goes at half the speed. You probably all know this, right? YouTube video, it's pretty heavy, right? Flash video, well, Flash doesn't really cover all the browsers, right? What else? HTML5 video, that's even fewer users, right? So what we did is this thing. I wrote this little thing that I call the Crashinator, for the Futurama reference anyway, that compares differences between frames, as you can see here, and constructs a sprite of just like the smallest rectangular deltas between individual frames. Right? So you can see how it works. It's a little bit of an assembly line kind of situation, right? And the sprite, as it happens, is below the limit that we have on Google for images we can load without user interaction. We have all sorts of limits, as I mentioned, right? Creates a sprite. And then, now if I show you how it's played, it just overlaps a new sort of rectangle with a little bit of the delta, right? So it looks like, let me actually show it to you this way. It's probably easier to understand, right? It really just takes one, this is, by the way, also just CSS. It's really easy to do things like this, which is amazing. But, it just dumps a new rectangle on top of the previous one. And it allows us to achieve whatever we wanted, right? It works on all the platforms. The sprite is tiny. We have complete control over where it goes, how it looks, what the speed is. We know where it's loaded, et cetera, et cetera. And we've used it for a number of other doodles since then. And one amazing thing today is that all of these things happen on the JavaScript side. There's very little that I do today that's server, which makes me very happy. I mean, except JavaScript is really weird as a language, but it makes me happy, right? Like all this spriting, all of the server-side tools are now happening mostly in JavaScript, right? And as a matter of fact, this is a regular iPhone running Safari. This is a regular page running Safari too. There's a Node.js server on my laptop, and they just talk to each other. It's open web. It's pretty amazing that I can do this kind of thing, right? I can just write websites, and they talk to each other, and I can carry one with me and whatever. That's pretty amazing. But, well, your first question might be, why am I using Safari if I'm on the Chrome team, right? We're going to get better this year, but Chrome is still not as good when it comes to animations and 60 frames per second, speed, fluidity of things. And as a designer, I kind of care about it a lot. That's also why I have, my iPhone. And, you could argue that, I don't know, but I think that's great about the web, right? Every browser today, Safari, Chrome, Opera, Firefox, they're all good at something. And they, every other browser looks at them and I wish I could do X as good as this browser. Right? I think that's a very healthy environment, and I'm very happy about this. Right? And I'm hoping, and everything looks like I will be using Chrome soon because it's really gotten much, much better in the recent months when it comes to hardware-accelerated animations and transitions. But some of you might actually be curious. I don't know how many of you do accelerometer stuff. Safari is actually built without accelerometer support by default. Right? So I was just showing you the Jules Verne doodle, how does it actually work? Well, what happens is that I have Chrome running in the background, supplying accelerometer data to Safari. Again, using WebSocket, which I think is pretty amazing. I mean, it's not a realistic situation for client-facing code, but it's pretty great. It's like a browser symbiosis, and they can work together to for my presentation to be a little bit better, I hope, right? So I don't know, it's pretty great. And again, open web, all sorts of web standards, everybody can do that, right? So let me show you another thing really quickly. We had this doodle for World's Fair, right? That we wanted to be just, the user to explore those things, right? So there's this image that's in high res. You can see there's some animations here. Let me just try here. You can see this dress rotating, and there's this loop, right? It seems incredibly simple, right? And of course, you can do this kind of thing in Flash. You can do this kind of thing using WebKit mask, right? Because you can supply an arbitrary alpha channel mask. But that's WebKit, or that's Flash, right? It's not good enough. Right. So what do? We could kind of come up with some hack where we have a rectangle and use border radius to make it a circle, right? Everybody knows how to do that. But the problem is there's no way to crop it so that animation will work, right? Unless you just have big frames of animation, but that's too much for us, right? So what we did was this thing. Let me just remove this and put this on. We actually have 3 separate divs, right? Each one has a big image that's cropped. You can actually show you here. Right? And they all 3 kind of work in parallel. So you can see those rectangles. I don't know if you can see them very well. those rectangles there are animations, like those wheels there. And if I do this, for example, they fall in between. So there's actually two separate GIFs you see. They just happen to be working in unison, right? And the thing is that it totally works, right? And again, we have this really hack situation where, where it makes me feel a little bit dirty when I do stuff like that. But, when I remove all of this, and, and then I ask the illustrator, hey, can you make a thick border for me? Because if it's thinner, it would have to be more rectangles. It would be a little bit slower, right? So, and the thing is that nobody knows any better. And I think that's pretty amazing. Right? It's the same thing about the source code on Yar's Revenge. If you don't know it's a source code, it's a cool-looking explosion. Well, it's cool-looking in 1981, but this kind of stuff, right? So there's, again, this another tension between a code that feels nice, the properly semantic valid code that works in every browser without hacks, without whatever, and then there's code that gets the job done. And sometimes, I tend to think that, at least for the things I do, all sorts of hacks, doodles, experimentations, like if you don't really do anything that feels a little bit nasty, you're probably already behind, which is sad, but it's kind of the reality of it, right? So it's also just covering up for your personal kind of shortcomings as a programmer. When we did Pac-Man, about like a week before the launch, my friend was playing it, and he went through the wall. Which is like, holy shit, like, it's a week before launch. Like, that's not supposed to happen. And I have no idea what's going on, right? What I did, and this is a literal comment from my change list that's in production, I said, like, I don't know how to fix this problem. Well, I'm going to fix the symptom. If you're in the wall, and we're going to just detect if you're in the wall, I'm going to dump you back in the corridor. And you're going to be a little flicker, but it doesn't happen often. I don't know how to replicate it. It's going to take care of that, I hope, right? So... and from what I know, I haven't heard of any, we get tons of emails and tweets and whatnot about Pac-Man. Haven't heard of any comment about that, so hopefully that fixes it. But, like, as the title goes, you gotta do what you gotta do sometimes. I'm not really the greatest programmer ever, especially compared to, like, other people I work with, where I feel always ashamed about, all sorts of stuff that I do. But, like, I do, the general goes to war with the army he's got, as they say, right? So, there's this other thing. Let me show you another hack that I put together. So this is the Stanisław Lem doodle. This is the original illustration for his book that the style of that we tried to mimic, right? The illustrator who worked with me tried to kind of resemble this particular style, hoping that people will recognize it, and people did, and it was really amazing. So you have this protagonist here, Trull, and a little bird, or owl, or whatever you want to call it, that we repurposed to actually carry items for Trull, and do all sorts of things as he kind of goes on his mission. Right? So you see the guy here, you see the bird there, right? The bird is actually carrying already some of the parts. And let me just show you, and take a look at the bird, right? So the bird is like covered by the bubble, right? It's gonna fly down, and it's actually gonna be covered by a mask on the left, right? It disappears a little bit, drops the items, but then it's a shooting level. We don't want the bird to be in the way. And the bird just goes like, whatever, I'm just gonna sit on the I'm feeling lucky button, right? It's cool, right? Some people discover it's kind of cute, whatever. What happens here is amazingly difficult, right? This whole thing is a canvas, right? On the browser supported, it's canvas, and it's all, sprite elements that, because canvas is faster, right? But, we have a fallback for, browsers don't support canvas. It's all DOM diffs, and, they're cut and whatever. So at some moment during this animation, the bird left the canvas element and became a little DOM element with a couple of DOM elements in the middle and just flew there, outside of its canvas, right? And then at some point in the future, when this level is over, it's going to do the opposite. And nobody will ever know, right? Which is kind of like, and it's like 5,000 lines of code to support like DOM and canvas and switching in between them kind of quietly, right? And there's another example of this later. And the thing, why do we all do this, right? Like, why do we spend all of this effort, on like so many lines of code for something that goes on only for like 24 hours, or sometimes only in specific locations, right? There's somebody at the beginning mentioned, again, this tension between art and technology. There was a Steve Jobs quote, and it's all valid, and there is this tension, we have that too. But I think for us, or for me personally, the more interesting tension is between us getting excited about art and technology and remembering what we're here for, right? The Google homepage is not a place for technology demos, right? It's not a place for like, oh, we can do this in CSS3, let's do this on the homepage, right? We want to. I mean, we all want that. We're all here because we're excited about technology. The same way the illustrators would probably want sometimes to do like the craziest illustration ever because that's exciting for them, right? They want to learn a new style, they want to try some new tools and whatnot. And we do that sometimes, but we always have to remember we're celebrating people or we're celebrating events, right, on the Google homepage. And we're celebrating specific people and events that, you know, we have some rules about what can we do doodles for and what we absolutely can't ever. Like, we don't really celebrate like tragic events, even though, you know, they're worth celebrating and remembering, but it's not what we do. That's not what the Google homepage is for. So we have to remember that, you know, we have reasons for those doodles to exist, and we have to respect them, right? So sometimes the best use of technology is not to use it at all, right? To have a simple illustration that gets the job done. And sometimes it's something very simple, like the crushing, right? It's an animation, it's a technology that you won't even notice, or the loop, or some of the Lem stuff, right? So for example, this is the beginning of the same doodle. And I'm going to spoil it for people who haven't played yet, but we're actually doing this thing where we expand the canvas, right? It's the first doodle that actually gets big and kind of crazy. And you know, it's cool, of course, like it helps us do all sorts of things, like, you know, have big, you know, robots and whatnot, which we wanted to do. But really, we did it. Oops. Here we go. Sorry about it. Here we did it because we just wanted to resemble the illustration in a book, right? It was a very specific portrait mode. It has a very specific style. We want our doodle to be respectful of that, right? So if we really do. So if you know, if we can. And you know, again, building the kind of thing that expands it, you know, if you think about all of the homepage variants that we have, all of the browsers we have to support, you know, touch devices and all sorts of things, it's actually quite complicated. And again, you can look at the code that's open source and see how many lines there are just to expand it, so it works very well, right? Here's the other thing. The doodle ends with this big explosion that destroys not only the doodle, but the whole Google homepage, all of the elements and whatnot. You can see it a little bit here, you know. And again, it's kind of cool, right? Explosion of the Google homepage, destroying the Google homepage. Like, yeah, I want to be that guy, right? Who wouldn't be? But who wouldn't want to be? But really, it's, again, based on a story in the book. The story, you know, ends with somebody asking, can you create nothing from a machine that can only create things for a letter N? And that's what the machine does. It just creates nothing, which means it moves everything. Again, kind of a scary thing to put on our homepage, but you know, we got away with it. And actually, in the book, the machine is stopped, so it doesn't come to an end. In our case, it felt like a really nice ending that's spectacular and kind of cool and kind of funny, and something we've never done before, right? And I'm again and again amazed and kind of humbled and touched by some of the feedback, even indirect, of people who notice those things, right? Of people who, like very few people who are on the same wavelength as we are. You know, a lot of people are excited about this, but you know, how many people will, you know, only people who read his stories and remember them, these are the stories from like 1960s and 70s. And again, it's this tension of, you know, trying to, for everybody to have fun, but for those people who really care about something or somebody, notice those extra details, right? So Pac-Man, for example, going back to this doodle from 2 years ago, the original Pac-Man was a deterministic game, which meant if you did exactly the same thing second, third, fourth time around, it would behave exactly the same way, which now means you can have patterns, right, to defeat Pac-Man. There were actually books you could buy like this one to, you know, that would teach you what the patterns are to get, you know, a high score or whatever. Games don't do that anymore in the arcades, where like arcades don't exist anymore, but games don't do that because, you know, that's not a good bang for your quarter if you can play for like half an hour, right? So as a user, that's great, but not as an arcade owner, right? And of course, we want Pac-Man to be as faithful to the original as possible, right? The only really big change we introduced was that it kind of looked like Google, right? Because it had to. And somebody actually noticed. And people started building patterns for our Google Doodle, which is kind of cool, right? And you know, people are like really proud of like figuring out how it works and whatnot. For the Jules Verne Doodle, the illustrator Jen actually added narwhals which are like unicorns, but underwater. And the big difference is that they actually exist. Like people were like, oh my God, what is this? Like, what did you put there? And oh my God, they really do exist. And let me show you why. Like the next day, there was so much feedback about these creatures that people found. Dictionary.com made the narwhal a word of the day and explained to people what it really is, and it really does exist and all sorts of stuff. And it's again kind of like, it's an Easter egg almost, right? But people know this and people got excited about it. And I think that added so much more value to the doodle. On the technology front, we're also excited when people look at what we do and say, we want to do things like that too. Right? We didn't know stuff like Pac-Man was possible on the web, or we didn't know you could have, accelerometer support and whatnot. So some people try to reverse engineer what we do, and it's pretty amazing. Like somebody actually described how Crashinator works. Well, they didn't know it's called Crashinator, but that's fine. That completely reverse engineer the whole thing and build it, and it's amazing. And I love that. And I was just chatting with somebody today morning, I think, telling me how they looked into the zipper code yesterday to see how it works. That's amazing, right? Because if people get excited about the web, like that works for us as a company, that works for me as a person because I love the web. I love what we can do with it. And if more people can do that, that's amazing. So we got also a lot of interesting feedbacks. This is from yesterday. This is after the doodle for Stanisław Lem in November. It's funny. Like it's really very endearing. I love this one, right, for Jules Verne. Like how amazing it is that the browser is now the operating system, right, for some people. Like they didn't know they have accelerometer even, and the original purpose of it being here, it's a whole different story. But now they learn it. Some people just picked like randomly, like, oh my God, what it did. And some people heard about it through a grapevine. But it's amazing that we can promote that, right? We get people excited about, oh my God, the web is so amazing now. This is one of my personal favorites. Like I grew up in the arcades, right? I played all sorts of video games, and that probably got me where I am today, because I was really interested about how they work. And the arcades don't exist anymore. Right? They really, they in some vestigial form, but it's not what they used to be. Everybody plays at home now. But that one day in May 2010, like we brought the arcades back, right? In all sorts of places where they didn't exist anymore. And that's amazing for me. And I'm like very, very happy when I see stuff like that. And I want to do more things like that. And to end, I have one story that's, again, very, very recent. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this little computer. I know how popular it was here. We had this doodle that we wanted to run in the UK, because this is a British computer. It's, again, early 80s, the same kind of idea as Atari 2600. And we had this problem. It was also St. George's Day in the UK. So again, we thought about, well, what if we could do a tandem doodle, right? Again, celebrating two things at the same time. And my friend on the doodle team, he whipped out some picture. It was kind of cool. But the ZX Spectrum has a very specific way it uses graphics, right? It's, again, very early 80s. The technology is not very advanced. So even though they have color graphics, there are very, very particular rules about, this has to be 256 bytes times 192 bytes, and every 8 by 8 pixel only has 2 colors, and there's various color combination that can be used, etc., etc. It's a measure of my nerdiness that I actually never had this computer, and I knew all of this, but it's a whole different story. But I told Ryan, that's like, we have to get it right. We have to get it right, because like, otherwise, what's the point, right? So this is the end result. This was, what, Monday, I think, in the UK? And this is exactly the, 256, exactly how it would look on a ZX Spectrum. So it's a graphics from that computer and a St. George's Day doodle, right? And again, it seems like it's kind of simple, right? But on the plane here, literally, I had to write this validator using HTML5 drag and drop and all sorts of file reader and stuff like that to actually check the doodle every 8 by 8 pixels to see if it's correct, right? Because again, it's like those, here you can see some of the, this is an invalid combination of colors, and there's 3 colors here, it can only be 2, right? So I spent as much time writing this validator as, as Ryan spent drawing it, really. But it was kind of cool. And by the way, this is a good trick for me. Like, every project you do, treat it as if it was really much more important than it is. Right? For this presentation, I actually have a console that's logging what I do and network traffic and the accelerometer, because I'm like, having a console, it's kind of awesome. Like, I want every project that I have to have a fucking console. And you know where it's coming from? It comes from Quake, right? Quake had this thing you press tilde, and that's amazing. I want all my projects to be so awesome, right? And the thing is that we had 29 iterations of the doodle to get this right? So this is early sketches, early things, and you can see it kind of evolved from like being a little bit more game-like and a little bit more like title-like in the end. But what happened? You know, some people were like, what the hell is this? Most people were like, I don't really get it. It's cute, but, you know. Some people were like, oh, this is the ZX Spectrum, you know. Like, it wouldn't really look good on the ZX Spectrum. It doesn't conform. And we're like, yeah, it does. We checked it. So one person, what they did was they took this thing, converted it to the ZX Spectrum emulator, and simulated how it would load on a cassette drive. This whole image, right? And it takes forever. And this is amazing. This is amazing for a number of reasons, right? First of all, technologically, this used to be a full screen on your TV, and it took like 45 seconds to load, right? Today, it's like a postage stamp thing on our homepage, and you can access it from anywhere. That's like remarkable in and of itself. In 30 years, we went from this being state-of-the-art to what we have today, right? It's also amazing that like somebody cared about it enough, and somebody found something in this doodle that we didn't really think about, almost, right? That somebody were like, I'm going to bring back this old computer to life just because, you know, some goofy two nerds in Mountain View, California did this thing, or like on a plane or whatever, right? That's pretty great. And like, I want everything that I do, you know, I hope that, you know, many people like it, but I want this, whatever I do, to be special to some people at least, right? That is for some people, it's going to be this little universe that they will just find themselves in, and they will, you know, try to explore it and try to enhance it and try to do all sorts of amazing things with it. And maybe, like for me, the Atari 2600 or this computer or whatever was the inspiration to, you know, eventually end up where I ended up today. Like maybe some people will start learning web programming from doodles, right? Or from inspect element and be like, oh, that's kind of cool. I could do more with that. Some people maybe will, you know, rediscover the love for old computers and, you know, disappear from the face of the earth. I don't know. But that's pretty cool. And in the end, all of these things, this wasn't really about technology, right? This was, you know, all of these people were working hard in like squeezing those little pixels, or actually they were pretty big pixels, in Atari 2600 to like do things that were never possible before, right? And they, you know, they maybe didn't know they weren't possible. They were just trying, and they ended up doing all sorts of amazing things that inspired more and more people. And I kind of want to think we all do that too today, right? If you were to take, you know, whatever you do today, go to Tim Berners-Lee in 1990, he'd be like, there's no way. This is not web. Web is like black text and blue links and gray background and, you know, images opening up in separate windows, but it's also like 1 year from now, and I don't know how I know that, right? It's like, it's crazy, but like we do that every time, right? And it's annoying because, you know, JavaScript and HTML and CSS like outgrew their usefulness long time ago, and we have to deal with all of this baggage and whatnot, but it's there. And it's, you know, I suppose at some point in the future, probably sooner than you think, you would be like, yeah, IS6, that was so cute. I kind of like that zoom. You know, it was like, oh man, I miss that, right? Like the way, like, you know, I bet you that's going to happen. Today it's like, no way, but, you know. And I think all of this is worth it. Like if we can, you know, if things, you know, that I do, things that we do can mean as much as Atari 2600 to some people, or some of our doodles to other people, like, I think that's a pretty great outcome. And it's sometimes worth like spending these nights in IS6 and, you know, coding and learning all of this cutting-edge HTML stuff that's not even documented anywhere, right? I hope that's worth it, and I would love to see what you guys are up to, and I hope, you know, I can get some more interesting things done as well. So that's everything from me.